In more than 20 years of practicing medicine, I've collected interesting facts about your body. Join me on a tour head to toe of
Your body is interesting.
your gastrointestinal tract is a tube running from your mouth all the way down to your anus. Your mouth mechanically breaks up the food. Your stomach chemically liquefies it so that in the small intestines the nutrients can be absorbed, and then finally the large intestines removes the water. The food moves along by a process called peristalsis. The muscles lining the intestines contract in a coordinated fashion like a wave, and in a unidirectional wave, which moves the food along from the beginning to the end. Snakes are essentially a muscular tube as well, and slither along by a similar fashion. The esophagus is the name of the tube between your mouth and your stomach. The peristalsis there is so efficient you can actually drink a glass of water while standing on your head. Now the acid in your stomach is hydrochloric acid, an acid so strong it can melt steel. There's certain substances that are impervious to acid. If you fill a metal bottle up with acid, it'll melt, but if you fill a glass bottle up with acid, it is unaffected. And the way your stomach protects itself from being melted itself is the lining secretes a layer of mucus which is impervious to this acid. Now, when the thickness, the wall of the stomach secretes acid out the surface that goes towards the cavity of your stomach, for the stomach lining itself to remain unchanged, for its pH to remain the same, it has to blow out an equivalent amount of alkali, the opposite pH, out the opposite side, which is the side of the bloodstream. And so after a big meal, when you blow out all this acid into your stomach, you're blowing out all this alkali into your bloodstream, which makes its way up to your brain, and that's why you feel tired after a big meal. In kosher diets, one doesn't mix meat and dairy. Years later, a scientist found that the enzyme that digests meat, called pepsin, works best in an acidic environment, and a different enzyme that digests dairy products like milk is lactase, which works best at the opposite pH in an alkaline environment. In 1911, a fad diet called food combining came around, and it followed essentially the same principles of a kosher diet, which parallel that of the physiology of digestion. Your intestines are 25 feet long. They start at the end of your stomach and go all the way down to your anus. The first section after the stomach is called the duodenum, followed by the small intestine, then the large intestine, ending with the rectum. The term duodenum comes from the Latin for 12, because early anatomists found that the length of a duodenum was 12 finger breadths long. As mentioned, the large intestine's job is to remove the water so you can absorb the fluids that you drink into your system. If your large intestine doesn't absorb that water, that's diarrhea. And one of the way diarrhea occurs is if the large intestine starts moving along too quickly. There's no time to absorb that water. And an example is when the large intestine is infected itself, it'll start moving along quickly to flush out the toxins and rid the body of the infection. Speaking of flushing, flush toilets date back 2,000 years BC to the Minoan civilization. The expression taking a crap or going to the John also alludes to the history of the flush toilet, because the inventor who was credited with the flush toilet's name was John Crapper. Now, no discourse on the gastrointestinal tract would be complete without some discussion on farting, flatulence, passing gas. First of all, most of that occurs while you're awake. Where the gas comes from is mostly 3/4 of it from the bacteria which live in harmony in your intestines, namely in the colon, that produce their gas, and the rest of it comes from either swallowing air or the combination of the acid in your stomach mixing with the alkaline juices in your small intestine and producing carbon dioxide as a byproduct. The nature of the gas that the bacteria make is predominantly carbon dioxide as well, with some hydrogen and methane. Methane is the component that gives it its characteristic smell, with or without some sulfur, based on your diet. And methane is flammable, which perhaps during your teenage years a friend of yours might have demonstrated by lighting one of his farts, pastime of young boys. Now, people with lactose intolerance, an enzyme deficiency that makes it so they can't digest dairy products, have a lot of extra gas. And the reason for that is the dairy products that they eat don't get absorbed by their own body and continue persisting along the gastrointestinal tract, and when it makes it to the colon, the bacteria there have a party. They've got more food for them, and then producing their carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and methane gas byproducts of their own digestion. Now, the gas produced by the bacteria breaking down milk is how the holes in Swiss cheese are formed. As the milk solidifies into a solid cheese, the gas pockets remain and form those holes, and then when you slice the cheese, you get the characteristic hole. Now, some people have a remarkable ability to manipulate the passing of gas with their anus muscles. A Frenchman named Le Patome used to actually perform on stage playing songs demonstrating his art with his unusual instrument. Pumpernickel is German for devil's fart. Where that comes from is when the bread was first invented by a baker, the locals actually found it to be an awful bread. However, with travelers passing through, some people in some other countries found it appealing and persists to this day. The most gas-producing bean is soy. If you want to decrease the gas from any bean, when you cook it with an equal portion of rice, and that'll remove the majority of this effect. Now, given that aside from the stomach, which is acid, the remaining length of the intestines, the environment is the same. It's alkaline. And I had mentioned that the bacteria seem to live exclusively, or at least 99%, in the large intestine. You got to wonder what makes that any better. The reason is that the rate of the peristalsis, the moving along of the intestines, is not uniform. The stomach takes about 4, maybe even 6 hours to get the food out of there. The small intestine moves very quickly, and there's no time for any bacteria there to proliferate and colonize. They get flushed out, and then in the large intestine, which moves very slowly to give it time to absorb all the water, they can multiply, and that's why you find them there. It's a fortunate thing, because the gas that the bacteria produced otherwise would have to traverse the zigging and zagging of the small intestine and would have difficulty getting out. Finally, bringing us to the rectum at the end of the line. The rectum is merely a storage station for your poop, and when it's full enough and stretches enough, it'll start wanting to contract, and you feel the urge to go to the bathroom, and so you do. The degree to which your bowel movements float in the toilet is dependent on how much gas is present in the stool. Now, you'd think that the composition of stool is simply the food that you ate that never got fully digested. Actually, a significant portion, 1/3 of your stools, are the bacteria that live in the intestines. Your intestines are not the only part of your body that bacteria live in harmony with you. They live on your skin as well, and they're so numerous that if you were to freeze dry a person, remove the water, and then figure out what percentage of the dry weight of a human body is these bacteria, it's 10%. In fact, there's more microorganisms on one person's skin than there are people living on planet Earth. The way microorganisms, single-celled organisms, proliferate is by a process called binary fission. They just split in half, and then those halves split in half, etc. An example of a single-celled organism is a paramecium. If all of its offspring were to survive indefinitely, and the first paramecium started dividing on January 1st, the ball of paramecium offspring would be the size of the planet by April. Now, of course, it's a good thing that the bacterial offspring don't survive very long, because otherwise we'd be in real trouble in our large intestine. You might therefore envision that the mission of the large intestine is to get rid of these bacteria, which, as I said, is a significant component of what stool is. It's as if there's this ongoing campaign to prevent your intestines from totally filling up with bacteria.